The last hill, the weight of steel. The hill didn't even have a name. That struck General Coren Malric as fitting in a way. After 32 years in the service of 4 crowns, 2 legitimate, 1 rebellious, and 1 crowned with fire, he'd learned that most hills like this, bare-knuckled rises of dirt and scrub, only earned names after too many men bled on them. Or under them, his boots sank half an inch into the wet earth as he stepped to the crest, armor whispering with each shift of weight. Below him stretched the vale of Altherin, wide and sullen, the color of old iron under a brooding sky. There, near the ruined stone bridge that once marked the border between the lowlands and the kingdom's last true stronghold, the Morvani had made their camp. Coren narrowed his eyes. Black banners, black tents, a disciplined, monstrous symmetry to their formation. Their fires were arranged in perfect squares, like a field sown by an obsessive hand. Even now, as dawn stretched her reluctant fingers toward the rim of the sky, the enemy were drilling. No laughter, no singing. The Morvani never sang. They had nothing to sing about. That was the trouble with invaders who believed they were ending the world instead of just conquering it. He counted the standard posts. 37. Each one represented roughly 200 men. That meant over 7,000 at minimum. Probably more, hidden in the forested slopes or waiting beyond the bend of the river. He turned away from the view and exhaled through his nose. His breath fogged the air briefly. "Damn it all," he muttered, not for the first time. Behind him, hoofbeats, light, cautious. Sergeant Halwyn approached, pulling his gelding to a stop. The man dismounted slowly. "We counted 28 forward towers, General, mobile siege platforms, and 4 war wagons with blade wheels." Coren didn't answer right away. He knelt at the edge of the rise, scooped a bit of dirt in his gauntlet, and let it fall. Wet, heavy, the kind that sucked the bones from men's legs during a retreat. "Tell me how many men we have fit to hold a line," he said quietly. Halwyn hesitated. 1,800, with another 400 levy. The Iron Hooks arrived from Veridorn last night. They've got another 100 spearmen. "Are any of them sober?" "Some." Coren nodded slowly. "And the engineers?" 2 siege mangonels, 1 working, the others more dream than wood. Coren allowed himself a breath of laughter, a sharp sound, bitter and dry. "I'm getting tired of writing good men's deaths in advance," he said. Halwyn was quiet. Coren didn't expect comfort. It wasn't the sergeant's job. Halwyn had served him through 2 campaigns and a naval siege that had ended in fire and frostbite. What passed between them now wasn't loyalty, it was endurance. The soldier didn't ask for plans or promises. He simply waited. Coren stood. "We'll set the central line along the north ridge near the old burial cairns. Get the archers higher. Scatter them among the oaks. Spread out what cavalry we have on both flanks. Tell them to be visible. It won't help much, but I want the Morvani to think we've got more than ghosts." He paused. "And make sure the scouts avoid the marshes. We can't afford to lose another damned horse." "Yes, sir." Halwyn mounted again and rode off without ceremony. Coren remained. He looked down at the field one more time. It was too open, too wide. The valley had been a strategic disaster since the old road collapsed 20 years ago. No natural choke point, no defensible crossings. The only protection came from shallow hills that wouldn't slow a Morvani charge for more than seconds. The river behind them, thin, choking with reeds, wasn't deep enough to drown a man in, let alone stop a retreat. This was where they would die. But still, He had drawn the line here. In his tent, the maps lay unfolded, like old wounds. The ink was fading, but he knew them by heart. He had walked these lands before the kingdom cracked into fragments, before the last High King of Altherin was beheaded by his own council. Back then, Coren had still believed in things, flags, oaths, noble causes. That faith had bled from him in stages. He remembered Veridorn, the screams in the firelight, the smell of pitch on a burning sea. He remembered King Raska's final order. "Buy me a day, Coren. One day to run." He'd bought it with 7,000 lives. 30 years, he murmured, and this is what I've learned. You can only stop the flood by drowning in it. The tent flap stirred. Lieutenant Seren entered, her expression carved from discipline. She saluted with a nod. "General, the forward scouts returned. Confirmed Morvani heavy foot are 2 hours out. They'll be ready to march by dawn. They've begun burning the old villages behind the ridge." "Any sign of movement toward the marshes?" "None. Their eastern flank is resting against the swamp line. They've built supply tents right up to the reeds. No fortifications." "Of course not. The Morvani didn't fear what couldn't charge. Swamps didn't fit their battle doctrine. And that terrain was impassable to anyone with half a brain." Coren rubbed his jaw, the bristles scraping his glove. "Dismissed, Lieutenant." After she left, he sat in the old command chair, a gift from the last war, oak and steel. No one else used it. It creaked like an old man and had a knife wound through one leg. But it had survived 7 campaigns. That made it more durable than most of the kingdom. He reached for the old leather-bound satchel on his desk and pulled out a worn, sealed letter. He'd written it 4 days ago. "To the one who survives me, bury me on the hill where I fall. No markers, no statues, only the sword. Let them find that, and know I did not run." Night fell early. The sky over the vale turned from grey to bruised violet, then to charcoal. Stars were pale, as if hesitant to witness what came next. Coren walked the lines in silence. The men were quiet tonight. There were no songs, no boasts, only the sounds of sharpening blades, oiling bowstrings, quiet prayers half-choked in the throat. A boy approached him near the quartermaster's station, thin, awkward, helmet a size too large. "Sir?" Coren looked at him without expression. "Speak." The boy stiffened. I'm Jarik Fen. I'm a runner, for Captain Errol. And I heard the captains, that we're not going to win tomorrow." Coren raised an eyebrow. "Do you make a habit of eavesdropping on senior officers?" "No, sir," Jarik said quickly. "Only when they argue loud." That drew the smallest twitch of amusement from the general. "Very well, Jarik Fen. And do you have a solution to this unwinnable war?" The boy shifted nervously. "No, sir, but well, I know the marshes. I was born in Reeves Hollow. My father used to fish in them. Before the Morvani came." Coren's expression didn't change. "Go on." "There's a path, a causeway, hidden under the reeds. You can only see it when the moon hits right, but it's solid. I've walked it. It loops behind the hill and comes out near the old stone arch, the one the Morvani built their latrines behind. They think it's dead land." Coren's fingers slowly curled into a fist. He said nothing for a long time. Then, "Be in my command tent at second bell. If you're lying, I'll hang you for raising false hope." "I'm not lying," Jarik said, eyes bright with something close to desperate pride. "I swear it." Coren nodded once. And as the boy vanished into the dark, the general stood alone in the cold, eyes fixed eastward, toward the swamp, toward a ghost of a chance. Mud, straw, and bone. The marshes weren't on any official map. Oh, they were sketched on old vellum charts, wrinkled patches of faded green labeled Reeves Hollow or Eastern Wetlands. But those were lies in ink. No map could catch the stink of rot in the reeds, or the way the ground sometimes sighed under your feet, or the nests of biting flies that buzzed like cursed choirs at dusk. Jarik Fen had known every inch of those swamps, not by choice. It was where the poor lived when they were too poor to be noticed, too stubborn to die, or too clever to be conscripted. It was where his mother had boiled fish bones into soup, and where his father's boots had vanished into muck, the day the Morvani burned their home. The causeway wasn't really a path, not one you'd see. It was old, half-sunken stone, laid long ago by forgotten hands. Jarik's father had found it during a storm, when the water rose and the reeds opened their secret mouths. He used to say the gods laid it there as a joke, a dare. Jarik used to laugh at that. Now he wondered if the gods had been serious. Jarik sat outside the general's tent, staring at his hands. They were shaking. He tried to hide it, curling them into fists, pressing them against the rough wool of his trousers. But the tremor was there, crawling up his arms like a fever. Every sound in the camp felt sharper tonight. Every clang of armor, every cough, every murmured prayer from the older soldiers. They didn't see him, not really, just another runner. Straw-haired, narrow-shouldered, mud-footed, like 1,000 others. That was fine. Better to be unseen when you're terrified. Inside, General Coren Malric and his captains were arguing. They didn't shout like farmers in a tavern. They snapped words like blades, short and heavy. Jarik caught fragments. It's a child's fantasy. He's from the marshes. He knows it. 200 men? You'd risk them on the word offer boy. We're risking everyone already. Then silence. Moments later, the flap opened. Captain Errol stepped out, grim as ever, scar down one cheek. A hard man. He looked down at Jarik with the same face one might wear while inspecting spoiled meat. The general will see you now. Jarik rose on shaking legs. Coren Malric stood by a table of maps, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He didn't look at Jarik at first. He stared at the eastern quadrant of the valley, his gloved finger tracing the edge of the marsh. You've walked the causeway. Yes, sir. How far? All the way. From Reeves Hollow to the stone arch behind the Morvani's camp. It's narrow, but dry. If you know the way. If. Coren looked up, eyes like storm clouds over snow. You understand what happens if you're wrong? Jarik nodded. Men die. No, men drown. They sink screaming into mud that doesn't give back bones. They get stuck, and they watch their friends pulled under, and if they're lucky, they're found by Morvani scouts and get a cleaner death. I'm not wrong. Coren stepped closer. His presence was like pressure. Not cruel, not angry, just immense. Walk it again. Tonight, take 2 scouts. If they return with you alive, I'll plan around it. Jarik nodded, mouth dry. Yes, sir. And if you don't return, Coren said, I'll assume you were lying, and I'll burn that swamp myself before I let men vanish into it. Jarik met the general's gaze. He didn't speak this time, just nodded again. The marsh greeted them with silence. Jarik moved first, bare feet padding over the wet grass as he led the two scouts, both older men, grim and reluctant, into the wall of reeds. The moon hung above like a pale coin, lighting their way in fragments. Every so often, one of the scouts muttered under his breath, swatting at biting insects or brushing swamp gas from his nose. They didn't believe him. That was fine. He needed them to follow, not believe. Jarik paused at the edge of the water. A stretch of reeds lay ahead, rustling in the windless dark. He crouched, ran his fingers across the muck, and found the first stone. He stepped forward. The scouts hesitated. "It's there," Jarik whispered. "Watch my feet. Step where I step. No more, no less." They followed. One step, then another, then 20. Jarik moved like a ghost, every muscle in his body screaming with tension. He could feel the pull of the bog beneath the stones, slow, sucking hunger. One wrong move, one misstep, and it would welcome them down. But the path was there. Even after the rains, even after the years, it still held. Half an hour passed. They emerged from the reeds into a wide, silent clearing where moonlight touched solid earth. The Morvani were just over the rise. They could smell the smoke of their fires. One of the scouts muttered a curse. The other dropped to a knee, peering through the brush. "Holy hells," he whispered. He wasn't lying. Jarik didn't smile. He just turned, pointed silently to the trail behind them, and began the walk back. The general's war table was no longer a table. At some point, it had become a shrine, a cracked slab of pine that bore the weight of every bad choice still to be made. Maps, scout reports, casualty estimates, charcoal sketches of terrain and enemy deployment, all laid out like offerings to a cruel god who only accepted death in return. Coren Malric stood over it, arms crossed, face unmoved. Behind him, the tent flickered with torchlight. The wind outside howled like wolves across the valley. 3 captains, 2 sergeants, and 1 grim-faced quartermaster surrounded him. All waited. "You're serious," said Captain Tharrell, the youngest of them. His beard had only just begun to grey, and the cords in his neck stood out like ropes. Coren didn't look up. "I wouldn't waste your time if I weren't." Tharrell stepped back, incredulous. 200 men, through a swamp, led by a peasant boy who probably bathes in eel water, to strike the rear of a force 7 times our size. "Yes," Coren replied calmly. Tharrell opened his mouth, then shut it. There were no words. Captain Errol spoke next, his voice low and flinty. "And if it works?" Coren raised his eyes. "Then the Morvani lose their command post. Their signal flares collapse. Their formations break. And they're caught between 2 screaming fronts. We punch the center while they're spinning." Errol nodded. Not approval, just understanding. Errol had fought under Coren since the siege of Daleth. He'd followed him through burning cities, freezing gorges, and once through the belly of a dying kraken on the Salt Coast. He knew what it meant when Coren stopped gambling and started calculating suicide. "Then we'll hold the center," Errol said. Coren turned to the map. "The key is confusion. They must believe we're giving everything to the front. I want the archers spread wide but sparse. Make them think we're thin. Cavalry must feint hard on the left. Let them think we're trying to flank. But the real stroke comes from behind." Tharrell still looked unconvinced. "Even if the boy is right, 200 men won't win a battle." Coren looked him dead in the eye. "No, but they'll change it." By morning, the plan was born. Coren ordered silence from every man who knew. The vanguard would be small, 200 at most. Light armor, short blades, no banners. They would move under moonlight the next night, strike at the Morvani rear, and throw chaos into their ranks. The main army would draw them forward. Coren would lead the front line himself. The captains objected. "You're the general. You shouldn't be in the front." Coren silenced them with a stare. Who else would follow a dead plan into a dying day? Jarik watched it all from the edge of the tent. No one addressed him. That was fine. He didn't need their praise, only their trust. That night, he was handed a blade. "Never killed a man?" asked a grizzled sergeant. "No." "Don't worry, you won't have to try. You'll be too scared to miss." The next day passed slowly. In a tent near the eastern edge of camp, the vanguard assembled. Jarik sat on a low crate, cradling a battered helmet in his lap. Around him were men of all kinds, scarred raiders, exiled knights, marshland hunters, and a few pale conscripts whose hands hadn't yet held blood. They had been chosen not for strength, but for speed, silence, and desperation. A sergeant with a missing eye paced before them. "You are ghosts," he said. "You do not cough. You do not clank. You do not step unless you know where your foot will land. The boy leads. You follow. If he falls, you retreat. If you speak, you whisper. If you shout, you'd better be dying." Jarik tried not to look at the faces of those around him. If he saw them as people with names, with stories, he might start to wonder which ones wouldn't come back. He might wonder if he was dragging them into the same grave that swallowed his father. Instead, he stared at the helmet. It was his father's, too big, cracked down one side, still smelled like peat and fish scales. While the others oiled weapons or carved charms, Jarik walked alone to the edge of camp. He found a stump, sat quietly, and let the wind brush over him. It smelled like burning wood from the Morvani fires. The sky overhead was clouded, moonlight dimming in and out, like a flickering lantern. Footsteps behind him. "Coren." The general didn't say anything at first, just stood beside the boy, watching the valley beyond. "How old are you?" Coren asked. 17, maybe. My ma used to keep track, but after Reeves Hollow burned, we stopped counting. Coren nodded slowly. "When I was 17, he said, I thought a sword made you a man." Jarik waited. "I was wrong," Coren continued. "A sword makes you a weapon. Only this," he tapped 2 fingers against his temple, "makes you a man." Jarik looked up. "What if I'm both?" Coren smiled faintly. "Then may the gods help the fools who stand against you." The army prepared. Cooks distributed final rations, flatbread, smoked meat, dried berries. Armor was checked and rechecked. Archers strung their bows thrice, fingers numb from repetition. Cavalry greased saddle leather and painted sigils on their mounts' flanks. Coren walked the line. No armor, just his red cloak and a sword at his side. Everywhere he stepped, silence followed. Men nodded. Some touched their hearts. Others turned away, unable to meet his eyes. They all knew. This wasn't a battle. It was a stand. A death stand. He stopped at a knot of young conscripts sitting near the supply wagons, quietly passing a flask between them. They stood awkwardly as he approached. "Drink," Coren said, "but only enough to warm you. You'll need your hands steady." One of them, a boy with dark skin and missing front teeth, looked up and asked, "Is it true that you once held the Western Gate at Isole Bridge for 9 hours against 3,000 men?" Coren looked into the firelight. His face was unreadable. "No," he said at last. It was 8 hours, and it wasn't 3,000. It was 1,912. I counted every one. They stared, awed and terrified. Coren walked on. Soldiers prepared in silence. Some oiled blades, some carved names into wood, some wrote letters they'd never send. Jarik sat among them, forgotten again, and listened. He heard one man singing to himself, an old hymn, one his mother used to hum while cooking marsh snails. He nearly wept at that. In the central tent, the vanguard stood in a long line. Coren entered, armored now, red cloak dragging mud from the threshold. He looked at each man in silence. Jarik stood at the front, helmet under arm. "Your task is not to win," Coren said. "It is to wound. Deep. Sharp. Enough that the beast flinches. The rest of us will strike while it screams." No cheers, no chants, just nods. He paused beside Jarik. "You're ready?" "No," Jarik said, "but I'm going anyway." Coren nodded once. That's the right answer. That night, the army slept in shifts. The vanguard slept little. Jarik lay curled in his cloak, staring at the stars through the breaks in the clouds. He tried to remember his mother's face, but all he could see was the fire, the way it danced in the windows of their home, the screams echoing through the marsh. He didn't remember running, only the sound of boots behind him and the silence after they stopped. A hand shook him awake just before midnight. Time. He rose, gathered his gear, and joined the others. 15 minutes later, they slipped into the reeds. Jarik led them, 200 men, moving like shadows. Behind them, the army waited. On the hill. The one no one had named. Not yet. The night before thunder. Hours passed. By the time the last man disappeared into the marsh, only Coren and the forward line remained. His captain stood beside him, peering into the dark. Tharrell finally spoke. "Do you think they'll make it?" Coren didn't answer right away. "I don't know," he said. "But if they do, then tomorrow is the last day the Morvani walk into battle without fear." The camp had gone quiet. Not in fear, not entirely, but with the hush of men who knew what came next. The fires were low, like half-shut eyes. The clatter of armor had faded. There were no songs, no boasts, only the sound of whetstones on iron and murmured prayers drifting between tents like smoke. The Morvani army stood across the valley in perfect formation, their banners rigid even in the windless dark. They didn't light fires. They didn't rest. Coren could see their silhouettes against the ridgeline, silent and still, like statues waiting to be broken. On the hill above his camp, Coren stood alone beneath a pale sky, stars lost behind a veil of thin clouds. His armor was strapped and buckled, his cloak already dusted with the soft grit of battlefield ash. His sword, verdict, hung from his belt, polished for what might be the last time. The steel caught a glimmer of starlight. It looked sharp enough to wound the sky. He watched the marshes. They had vanished in the night, swallowed by fog. Somewhere in that choking silence, Jarik and the vanguard were moving, bare feet pressing into ancient stone, blades silent in their sheaths, breath held like a collective prayer. He had trusted a boy with 200 lives. He didn't know what that said about the state of his mind or the state of the world. Behind him, footsteps approached. Sergeant Halwyn again. Reports say the Morvani began final preparations at dusk. They'll march at first light. "Let them," Coren murmured. "They've never fought with fire at their heels." Halwyn remained still, then added quietly, Men are asking if you'll say something. Tonight. Coren didn't answer immediately. Then, no. Halwyn blinked. Sir? They don't need speeches. Not now. Not from me. He paused. Let them speak to each other. Let them remember why they're here. No man should die for a general's words. Halwyn nodded and left. In the lower camp, men sat in small circles. Just a few, huddled around low-burning coals or half-buried flint fires. Some sharpened swords, others patched torn mail with borrowed needle and thread. One small group of archers passed around a wooden token with names carved into it, names of the fallen from earlier battles. They added new ones now. A pale-skinned lad recited a poem under his breath, barely audible over the wind. He wasn't good at it, but no one asked him to stop. In a tattered tent near the far end of camp, a veteran named Malric told a story about the time he once fought off 2 highwaymen using only a shield strap and a broken bottle. Half of it was surely false, maybe all of it, but it made the others laugh, and the laughter, even bitter, was a balm. Coren passed them unseen, wrapped in his cloak, armor hidden. He didn't need to be saluted tonight. He only needed to listen. He stopped near a fire where 2 conscripts were writing letters. Carefully, slowly, as if the words themselves might ward off death. One of them was crying, quietly. The other kept a hand on his shoulder, steady and firm. Coren moved on. In a small clearing between the tents, he found Lieutenant Seren standing alone, polishing the edge of her longsword with a scrap of old silk. "You'll be with the left flank?" Coren asked. She nodded. "Aye, with the iron hooks and the skirmishers." "Good. You'll hold them longer than most." She gave him a sideways glance. "That's your way of saying we're doomed." "If we were doomed," Coren said, "I'd be riding the other way, with a sack of gold and a guilty conscience." Seren laughed once, dry and low. "Still time for that. I'd rather die tired than live ashamed." He turned to go, but she called after him. "General." He paused. I never said it, but thank you for putting me in command when others wouldn't have trusted me. I wasn't ready, but I learned." Coren gave her a small nod. "You were ready the moment you stopped trying to prove it." And then he left her to her sword. The command tent was quiet when he returned. On the table lay 3 folded letters. One for a bastard son he'd never met. One for a brother buried beneath the ruins of Daleth. And one for no one in particular. Just words scrawled to the wind. He didn't believe in gods anymore, but belief wasn't required to speak to the silence. Outside, the night deepened. The stars began to return, scattered and faint. The moon cut through the mist in slices, and the swamp stirred. Jarik walked in silence. The vanguard moved behind him in a long, narrow coil, 200 souls following one boy through death's back door. The stones of the old causeway were slick with dew. The marsh sucked at their boots with soft, jealous hunger. He led them with one hand outstretched, brushing the reeds, the other on his dagger. The only sound was breath and the soft thump of footfalls on stone. They were close now. The Morvani camp rose ahead, just past the final curtain of reeds. Its rear guard was relaxed, fires lit, guards yawning or pissing in the grass. They hadn't posted scouts into the swamp. Why would they? The enemy was in front, not behind. One of the men behind Jarik whispered, "We're really doing this." Jarik didn't answer. He could feel the weight of it on his shoulders, not just the strike, but the hope behind it. The belief that something he knew might change everything, that a peasant's memory of old stone and lost paths might tip the scale of an empire. He didn't want glory, he just wanted it to work. They halted. The last line of reeds swayed ahead. In the clearing beyond, the Morvani latrines stood like ghosts. Their signal tower, tall and narrow, loomed beyond. The vanguard knelt, silent. Jarik crouched beside the sergeant. "When we strike," he whispered, "we hit the command tent first. Then the tower. No screaming, no retreat, just strike, then vanish." The sergeant gave a short nod. Behind them, 200 men gripped steel and waited. Back on the hill, Coren stood atop the rise, looking over the valley. The sky was lightening, slow and red like a wound parting open. He could see the Morvani beginning to form ranks. No movement from the marsh yet. No horn. He gripped verdict and closed his eyes. For a moment, the world felt still, suspended, as if all time had drawn breath and refused to let it go. Then, a flash, a flicker of fire, far behind the Morvani line. A horn, not theirs, ours. Coren exhaled once, slow and steady. Then, in a voice that echoed across the slope, he shouted, "To arms, shields forward, archers to mark. Let them know we are not ash. Let them know we stand." The army roared, steel crashed, boots pounded, the line surged, and from the east, behind enemy lines, a banner rose in the smoke. Red and gold. A boy's hand raised it. Jarik Fen, Fisher's son, swamp rat, led the charge. The breaking hour. It began with fire, not from siege engines, nor the flaming arrows of opening volleys, but from behind the Morvani line, bright, sudden, impossible. A column of flame burst upward from the rear encampment as 200 Altherin soldiers, ghosts in leather and smoke, struck with sharpened steel and marsh-honed silence. The Morvani command tent ignited, collapsing in on itself like a falling crown. A horn, high, ragged, pierced the cold morning air. For a moment, everything stopped. Across the field, the Morvani army faltered. Commanders turned their heads. Signal runners froze mid-stride. The cohesion, the perfect, unnatural discipline, cracked. From the top of the hill, General Coren Malric saw it. He didn't smile. He moved ... "Advance!" he roared. His voice struck like a drumbeat, and the Altherin army surged forward in a wave of steel and breath and fury. What had been silence became a roar. Shields slammed together, spears angled, bows loosed their first volleys, and black-fletched shafts screamed across the grey light of dawn. Behind him, banners unfurled. Not many, but enough to tell the Morvani, "We are not broken yet." Coren led the center line personally, verdict drawn, red cloak flaring behind him like a banner soaked in old blood. He'd been in 37 battles, held 17 lines, taken 6 blades through flesh, but never had he felt the air split like this. There was something unclean in the wind. It reeked of ash, marsh gas, and desperation. His boots found purchase on the hard-packed earth of the hill. His soldiers around him, archers, skirmishers, levy pikemen, moved in trained sync, despite trembling hands and hollow eyes. This wasn't discipline. This was defiance. Coren raised his sword toward the Morvani line, now scrambling to realign as smoke rolled into their rear ranks. "Make them bleed for every breath," he roared. The clash came fast. Morvani forward spears charged hard, black plate soldiers, faceless behind full helms, descending like a black tide. Coren met them in a wall of shields. The sound was not like thunder. It was worse. It was crushing, like stone breaking stone. He didn't lead from behind. He was there, blade drawn, cutting low and fast, dodging heavier strikes with the reflex of a man who had learned long ago that style was for men who hadn't tasted desperation. He gutted one soldier with a slash across the inner thigh, kicked another's knee backward, drove verdict into a gap under the armpit of a third. The blood began to coat the earth in rivulets. His men saw him, followed him, fought harder. On the left flank, Lieutenant Seren commanded the iron hooks and the mounted remnants. They rode in short, brutal loops, feints and retreats, keeping pressure on the Morvani's flank, never allowing them to fold inward. Her face was streaked with mud and blood, eyes clear as river glass. She saw the smoke rising at the enemy's back and pressed harder. "We give them two fronts to fear," she bellowed. Her horse took an arrow to the chest and collapsed, but she rolled clean, rose, and kept swinging. Behind enemy lines, the swamp-born vanguard fought like devils. Jarik moved through fire. They had reached the inner camp. What began as a surprise strike had turned into a full engagement. Morvani officers scrambled to re-establish order. Runners were cut down. Tents were ablaze. Horses panicked and trampled their own men. Jarik's arm ached. His blade was chipped. His breath came in fast, sharp gasps. But he kept moving. He had stabbed two soldiers, one in the gut, one in the throat. The blood had been hot, wet. The first had screamed. The second hadn't. He didn't think about their faces. Only the fire. Only the mission. "Tower!" the sergeant beside him shouted. Jarik saw it, 50 paces off. The enemy's signal tower, tall and narrow, with the Morvani banner still fluttering. "If we drop it," the sergeant said, "they'll think the whole line's gone," Jarik finished. They charged together. Two men fell behind them. Crossbow bolts. One hit a vanguard scout in the jaw, another in the stomach. The screams were distant now, like underwater echoes. Jarik reached the base of the tower. A ladder ran up the side. No time to think. He climbed. At the top, a Morvani lookout turned, startled. Too slow. Jarik slammed into him with all his weight. They struggled, blades slipping in close quarters. The lookout drove a knife into Jarik's thigh. White heat tore through muscle. But Jarik didn't stop. He wrenched the man over the railing. The Morvani screamed as he fell, crunching against the base. Jarik tore the banner down and hurled it into the fire below. The tower was next. He drove the torch into the support beams and leapt. It collapsed behind him, flames curling skyward. Back on the field, Coren saw it fall. The enemy rear was in chaos. He pressed forward. "Now!" he roared. The central push redoubled. The Morvani formation, still tight but now directionless, buckled. Coren took a wound to the arm. Deep. Blood poured into his gauntlet. He didn't notice. Another captain fell beside him. Coren fought over his body. Behind him, his men screamed his name. Not in worship, but in rage, in survival, in raw, living madness. "Malric!" The Morvani began to retreat, but they had nowhere to go. The marsh behind them burned. The Altherin army pressed. The Morvani didn't scream like other men. When Jarik first heard it, really heard it, he realized that their cries weren't high-pitched, not desperate. They came low and guttural, like animals trapped in deep pits, as though their bodies understood fear, but their minds hadn't yet caught up. That was the sound, rising around him now. The command tent had collapsed. The tower was ash and bone, and behind the lines of a once-perfect army, 200 ghosts from the marshes were still cutting through shadows. But now the enemy had rallied, and the circle was closing. They had struck like fire, but fire burned out. The surprise was spent. Jarik knew it the moment the first wave of black-armored footmen came howling through the smoke, shields up, axes wet. These weren't camp guards or tent sentries. These were disciplined soldiers responding to chaos with structured violence. The vanguard had minutes, maybe seconds, to brace. Sergeant Vale, blood down his temple, dragged Jarik upright. "We hold the line at the wagons," he barked. "Stack them, form a crescent, bottleneck them, or we die screaming." Jarik hobbled after him, leg wrapped in a torn strip of someone else's cloak. Pain flared with every step, hot and raw. He ignored it. They overturned carts, smashed crates, built a makeshift barricade in the remains of the Morvani supply yard. 50 men, maybe less. The rest was smoke and names now. Jarik stood beside a man with half a face, gripping a bent spear. Another coughed blood and smiled at him. "Hell of a march, eh, Fen?" He didn't know the man's name. It broke something in him. The first charge hit hard. Steel on wood, iron on bone. Minutes bled into each other. Time ceased to matter. Jarik lost track of how many he'd fought, how many had fallen. He only knew that the lines kept coming, and each one broke a little more slowly. Then, a horn. From the front, the Altherin army had broken through. Coren Malric, alive or dead, had driven the wedge home. A fresh scream rolled across the battlefield. This one, not animal, not guttural. This was human, terrified. The Morvani line began to fold, and the soldiers bearing down on Jarik's battered vanguard paused for just a moment. That was all they needed. Sergeant Vale raised his blade. "Now, men!" he shouted, voice cracked. The marsh-born ghosts surged over the barricade, into the stunned Morvani rearguard. Jarik didn't remember drawing his blade, but it was in his hand when the Morvani broke against them. He ducked a swinging axe, drove his knife up under a chin plate, screamed as blood sprayed his face. Something heavy struck his shoulder, and he staggered, swinging blindly. The barricade shook. Another man fell beside him, an arrow buried in his gut. Still, they held. Not because they were strong, but because they had to. Jarik collapsed behind the shattered ruins of the command wagon. The wound in his thigh was bleeding freely now. The pressure bandage had come loose during the final push. He pressed a hand to it, teeth gritted, and stared at the sky. Smoke curled overhead. The sky was blue. When had it become blue again? The clouds were gone, no rain, just ash on the wind and the taste of metal on his tongue. Someone dropped beside him, Vale, coughing, and covered in 3 people's blood. The sergeant looked down at him, eyes sharp but no longer urgent. "You still breathing, Fen?" Jarik nodded. "Good. They'll need a name for this madness. Might as well have yours on it." Jarik coughed. "Didn't do it alone." "No one ever does," Vale said, "but most of us don't make it out to say so." Jarik looked around. Less than 30 remained now, some dragging wounded, some sitting, silent, blood dripping from their weapons, some just standing, facing nothing, faces blank. His leg burned, his hands were slick, the air choked with black smoke and horse sweat. The rest was up to the front line now. Jarik blinked through the smoke. A figure appeared, red cloak torn, armor black with blood. Coren Malric. Sword still in hand, he limped forward, dragging his wounded leg, eyes fixed on the broken Morvani standard. He didn't say anything, just looked at Jarik, and then he nodded. For the first time, Jarik let himself collapse fully. He laughed, half choked, half hysterical. Then the sergeant clapped him on the back, and the remnants of the vanguard began to chant, not loud, but with grim joy. Fen, 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 from the swamp to the center of hell. The fisher's boy had led them through. The Morvani army broke at dusk. They did not retreat. They shattered, scattered into the hills and rivers and woods beyond. No longer a force, no longer a nation's blade. The tide had turned, not because of overwhelming strength, but because a boy had remembered a path that didn't exist on any map, and a general had been mad enough to believe him. The cry in the reeds. Later, Coren returned limping, bloody, with his gauntleted hand pressed to a wound just above the hip. His armor was cracked in 3 places. His red cloak was gone, but his eyes were bright as fire in the wind as he dismounted his horse. He waved off help and moved slowly through the wreckage of the camp. He passed the bodies, the tower, the burned remnants of the Morvani command. He reached the remains of the vanguard and looked at Jarik Fen. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "You dropped their tower." Jarik coughed. "Wasn't doing much good up there." Coren's expression was unreadable. Then, "You turned their rear, burned their lines, broke their center." He crouched beside him, ignoring the pain in his own leg. "You changed the war." Jarik stared up at him, eyes rimmed red. "I was just trying to survive." Coren leaned in, voice low. "And you led others through hell to do it. That's command. That's war." He stood, turned to the others, and saluted. A full military salute. The same he had given to kings. "I name you the Pathwalkers," he said, "and I will not forget." No cheers, no cries, just nods. Tired, battered, bone-deep nods. Night fell. The fires burned low. The last Morvani stragglers were hunted down or fled into the wilds. The valley was quiet again. Silent. In that way, only a place of violence becomes. Jarik sat alone beneath the shattered signal tower. His wound had been wrapped. A medic had told him he'd walk with a limp for a while. He didn't care. He had lived. He had led. Coren approached once more, slower now. "I asked before," Coren said, sitting beside him. "What did your father call the trail?" Jarik shook his head. "Didn't call it anything." Coren nodded. "Then let me name it." He looked at the burned, blackened marsh stretching beyond the wreckage. "Let it be Fen's path." Jarik blinked. "You don't need to." Coren cut him off. "We name things so we remember. So men know who bled to give them the ground they stand on." He stood again. "You bought this valley, Jarik Fen." Then he was gone. Verdiction. The battlefield stank of iron, smoke, and the sour reek of fear. Coren Malric limped over corpses. His men, their men, it didn't matter anymore. Blood had soaked into the soil so deeply it squelched underfoot. Overhead, the sky had gone a dull grey again, as if it too had tired of watching. The Morvani weren't gone yet, not entirely, and he would not leave this hill until the last of them broke. He saw the final bastion ahead, a cluster of Morvani knights, tight around their banner, 20, maybe 30, holding in a defensive crescent at the base of the broken ridge. In the center of them, tall and still, was Tharn Mors, The butcher general of the Morvani, clad in black and silver mail, a jagged two-handed sword across his back like a flagpole of death. Coren's jaw clenched. He had seen Tharn once before, years ago, at a parley before the fall of Veridorn. A face like carved coal, dead eyes, no warmth, no hate, just purpose. The kind of man who didn't burn cities out of rage. He burned them because maps needed redrawing. Coren stepped forward alone. Behind him, his soldiers watched. The remnants of his captains stood back, breathing hard, hands slick, weapons limp in their grasp. They had nothing left but breath. And yet they watched, unmoving, because this was not a soldier's duel. This was the war's verdict. Tharn stepped forward in silence, drawing his sword with a slow, clean scrape. No words. That was the Morvani way. Coren unsheathed verdict, its edge still clean. That was how fast the blood dried in air like this. He did not call for honor. He did not pray. He simply moved. They met with a clash like falling towers. Tharn struck first, wide arcs of brutal power. His blade screamed as it cut the air. Coren ducked the first swing, stepped in close, drove his elbow into Tharn's ribs, and slashed low toward the knee. Steel met steel. Tharn blocked it with unnatural speed. The man was strong, too strong. His reach was longer, his stance unbroken. But Coren had never beaten men by being stronger. He won because he refused to stop moving. He pivoted right, slashed upward, testing Tharn's defense. It held. He rolled left, struck for the neck, blocked. A kick sent Coren stumbling. Pain flared in his hip. He caught himself, turned the stumble into a slide, and narrowly ducked a downward swing that would have split him from crown to collar. The duel was short, brutal, not elegant. It wasn't a dance, it was attrition. Old warriors beating the last strength from their bones, and Coren was tiring. A final clash drove him to one knee. Tharn loomed above him, sword raised, shadow black against the smoky sky. Coren snarled and let go. He dropped verdict, deliberately, drew the dagger at this belt, and lunged into Tharn's guard. The Morvani blade came down, but not fast enough. Coren's dagger buried itself in Tharn's side, between the ribs, up into the lungs. Tharn choked. His sword slammed into Coren's shoulder, sending him spinning. Blood sprayed across the ground. But Tharn staggered, dropped his sword, fell to both knees. Coren rose, picked up verdict, and drove it into Tharn's chest. Clean, final, silence. The last Morvani knights saw their general fall, and with him, their reason to fight. They didn't scream, didn't run. They simply dropped their weapons and knelt in the mud. Behind Coren, his army watched. A single voice called out, "The hill is ours." Then another, and another. "He's done it. The butcher is dead." And then, cheering. Not wild, not joyful, but victory's breath. After drowning, the wounded cried, the dying smiled. The living stood. Coren dropped to one knee, chest heaving. His vision blurred. Blood seeped from beneath his armor, hot and wet. A figure ran toward him, Jarik, limping heavily, one arm in a sling, face pale, but grinning like a madman. "You lived," Jarik said. Coren gave him a crooked smile. "So did you." They sat together in the mud, watched the broken army scatter like birds after thunder. The red and gold Altherin banner was raised behind them, torn and soot-stained. but standing. An hour passed, then another. Cleanup began. Corpses burned, the wounded were treated, names were gathered. A list began. Jarik walked the camp with a cane, pain in every step. He helped where he could, pulling survivors from rubble, bringing water, holding hands of the dying. He found a man carving names into a block of pine for the record. "What should we call the battle?" the man asked. "Hill of Smoke? The Fen Blood Stand?" Jarik paused. Then, "The Last Hill." The man blinked. "Why?" Jarik looked out at the slope, where thousands had fallen, and thought of Coren's words. "No one expected us to live past it," he said. "But we did." He walked on. Coren stood alone at the ridge where the duel had ended. He held Verdict upright, blade sunk in the dirt. His cloak was gone, his armor open at the chest, bloodied bandages underneath. He didn't feel strong. He felt empty, but he had seen the end of something, and he had chosen to stay. Behind him, a boy who had once been invisible to war had become its turning point. And Coren, once a weapon of kings, had proven that courage could still exist without command. He gripped his sword and let it go. Let it stand in the ground. Marker, symbol, ending. Tomorrow he would write reports, attend councils, bury men. But tonight, he let himself be still. The name in the smoke. The field had gone quiet. The sounds of steel and screaming had faded. The fire still burned in some places, small, controlled now, funerary pyres. Smoke rolled gently over the hill, as if the earth were exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. Victory never looked like glory. It looked like wreckage, like men walking with limps they hadn't earned yesterday, like armor too damaged to repair and names too many to record without tears. It looked like a hill where blood had dried in black rivers, and a sword planted like a grave marker in the center of it all. Coren Malric stood beside that sword for the last time. He didn't touch it, didn't try to reclaim it. Verdict had served him long enough. Let the earth hold it now. Around the camp, voices were soft. The wounded rested in rows beneath salvaged tents. Medics moved like ghosts. Supply carts were being repurposed as stretchers. Jarik passed between them, limping still but upright. Half of his face was bandaged. His sling was gone. He refused to wear it anymore, said it made him look like a patient, not a survivor. Coren watched him speak to a child, no older than 14. A courier who'd lost 2 fingers but still carried a satchel of unspent orders like treasure. Jarik knelt and gave the boy a coin. His own pay, most likely, and ruffled his hair. The boy grinned like someone who'd been noticed for the first time in his life. Good, Coren thought. The world will need more of that, more noticing. By mid-morning, the field commanders had gathered to discuss the future. Survivors from 7 regiments attended. Only 3 of the original captains were left alive. Lieutenant Seren, with her arm in a splint, now held the rank of commander and spoke with calm, decisive clarity. "The Morvani line is broken," she said, "but their homeland remains. This victory is one of momentum, not finality. We'll need supplies, new fortifications, and reinforcement from the northern lords. Otherwise, the next wave will roll right over our bones." Coren didn't speak. They looked to him often, waiting for opinion, for direction, but he gave none. He was done giving orders. Seren noticed it first. She said nothing, but when the meeting ended, she approached him. "You're leaving," she said. He didn't lie. "Yes." "Where will you go?" "Away from this hill, and whatever hills come next." She didn't argue, just nodded. Then let me say thank you, Coren Malric. You saved more than just a field. He looked at her then. You'll command better than I did. She smirked. No, just longer. The naming took place at dusk. The survivors stood in a ring around the planted sword. The pyres had burned down, leaving only smoke trailing like ribbons into the wind. The air was still, the sky bruised with twilight. Coren stood at the center. Jarik stood at his side. The young, the old, the maimed, the grieving. All of them watched. Coren's voice was quieter now, but it carried. This hill had no name before, he said. It was a place between places, a place we passed through, not one we marked. He looked around. But now it has cost us, taught us, held us. It has taken friends from us and given us a story in return. He gestured toward the boy beside him. It is named not for glory, not for generals, but for a path, through muck, through madness, through fire, and the boy who led us through it. He turned to Jarik. From this day, this is Fen's rise. He raised his hand, and every soldier followed. No cheers, just a single, shared gesture, the open palm raised in silence. A soldier's salute. Later, Jarik sat alone at the base of the hill, watching the wind run across the marsh grass. He held a small piece of wood in his hand, a carved token. The name of every vanguard soldier who had not returned was scratched into its surface. He ran his fingers over them, whispered them aloud, each name one by one. He didn't see Coren approach. You're not going with them, Jarik said without turning. No, Coren answered. Not my place anymore. They'll need you. They'll have you. Jarik laughed, dry. I'm just a marsh rat who got lucky. No, Coren said. You're a soldier who remembered a way forward. That's more than most. He sat beside the boy. The silence between them was not empty. Will you disappear? Jarik asked. Maybe, Coren said. Maybe I'll just go somewhere no one knows my name. Be a man again, not a story. Stories help people. They also kill them. They were quiet again. Then Jarik said, I still don't understand why you trusted me. Coren leaned back. Because I saw your eyes when you spoke about the path. You weren't proud. You weren't begging. You weren't even hopeful. You were certain, not in the outcome, but in the truth of it. Jarik nodded slowly. What happens next? He asked. Coren shrugged. We rebuild. You lead. They remember. Or they don't. Will we win the war? Coren didn't answer right away. Then, we won the part of it that matters. The next morning, Coren Malric was gone. No note, no farewell. Just verdict, still standing on the hill, and his red cloak folded neatly at its base. Some said he went to the mountains. Others claimed he sailed north, to die in a place with no names. Jarik never searched. He simply carried the story forward. 10 years later, they returned to Fen's rise. A monument stood there now, stone, carved simple. A sword cast in iron, shaped like verdict, driven into black stone. At its base, 2 names. Coren Malric, last general of the line. Jarik Fen, first pathwalker of the rise. Children were taught their story, not as legend, as truth. As the day when the hopeless stood and followed a boy into the reeds.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Storytime with Papa Owl. If you enjoyed the story, please like and subscribe.